Why does life so often leave you unsatisfied, even in the very moments you thought would fulfill you? The job you worked years for feels strangely empty once you get it. The relationship you longed for eventually loses its spark. The dream vacation ends, and you're left with the same restless mind you tried to escape. Arthur Schopenhauer believed this wasn't an accident. It wasn't bad luck. It was the structure of life itself. Life swings like a pendulum, he wrote, between pain and boredom. To him, human existence was caught in a cruel cycle. When you lack what you desire, you suffer. And when you finally get it, you grow restless, longing for the next thing. Modern psychology has given his warning a name: the hedonic treadmill. Studies show that no matter what happens, winning the lottery, getting married, buying a house, people's happiness levels return to baseline. The joy fades, the mind adapts, and soon, desire reaches out again. Schopenhauer saw this truth long before the research. To him, the problem wasn't just that we crave too much. It was that craving itself is endless. And here's the brutal part. He believed this striving wasn't a choice. It was built into what he called the will, a blind, irrational force driving all of life. Not reason, not virtue, not destiny. Will, a restless current pulling you forward, never letting you rest. Eastern philosophy noticed the same pattern centuries earlier. Buddhism taught that craving, tanha, is the root of suffering. But where Buddhism offered a path out of this cycle through detachment, Schopenhauer thought escape was almost impossible. The will was too strong, too relentless. This is why, for him, disappointment wasn't just likely, it was guaranteed. And yet, Schopenhauer's warning wasn't meant to depress us into inaction. It was meant to strip away illusions, to force us to see why happiness slips away the moment we think we've grasped it. So, if disappointment is inevitable, the question becomes, what exactly is it about desire that dooms us to suffer? Schopenhauer's answer was simple, but devastating. Desire never ends. The moment one craving is satisfied, another rises up. Like waves on the ocean, they never stop crashing. Think about it. You get the promotion you've been chasing, and almost instantly, your eyes move to the next rung on the ladder. You buy the new phone, the new car, the new house, and for a while, it feels good. But soon, you're restless again. The shine fades, the craving shifts. Schopenhauer called this cycle the work of the will, that blind, ceaseless drive he believed was at the core of all life. The will doesn't care about your peace of mind. It only cares about survival and striving. It uses you, pushes you, and then abandons you in boredom the moment desire is fulfilled. Modern neuroscience has proven him right in ways he couldn't have imagined. When you anticipate a reward, your brain floods with dopamine. But here's the cruel trick. Dopamine spikes before you get what you want, not after. Once you have it, the chemical high disappears. The thrill was never in having. It was always in the chase. This is why so many people mistake the pursuit of happiness for happiness itself. They run and run and run, but the finish line keeps moving. It's what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill. No matter how much you acquire, you end up back where you started. Schopenhauer believed this wasn't just a flaw in human nature. It was the design. Life itself is wired for striving, not satisfaction. Which is why he wrote, "All striving springs from want or deficiency, from dissatisfaction with one's condition, and is therefore suffering so long as it is not satisfied. And even when it is satisfied, that satisfaction is short-lived, because the will does not rest, it only reaches for more." So the real tragedy is not simply that desire is endless, it's that fulfillment itself becomes the seed of the next disappointment. Which leads to the darker question Schopenhauer forced us to face. If life is driven by a will that never stops, what does that make of freedom, happiness, or even meaning? For Schopenhauer, the answer was brutal. Not reason, not morality, not free choice, but the will itself. He described the will as a blind, irrational force at the core of existence. It's not personal. It doesn't care about your plans, your dreams, or your carefully written goals. It's the same drive that makes plants reach for sunlight, that makes animals fight for survival, that makes you restless even in your moments of comfort. And here's the crushing part. You don't control it. It controls you. Schopenhauer rejected the optimistic belief, popular in his time, that human beings were primarily rational creatures. To him, reason wasn't master at all. It was the servant of the will, dressing hunger up as choice. You tell yourself you chose that career, that relationship, that risk. But Schopenhauer would say, you were only following the pull of the will, and your reasons are just stories you tell yourself afterward. Psychology echoes this today. Research on decision-making shows that most of our choices are driven by unconscious impulses. Neuroscientist Benjamin Libet's experiments even suggested that the brain decides before we're aware of it, our sense of free will arriving milliseconds too late. We feel like we're in charge, but often we're passengers, narrating the ride. And if that's true, then life takes on a darker hue. Because if the will is always pushing, always pulling, then even your highest achievements are never fully yours. They are simply the will using you to fulfill its own endless hunger. This is why Schopenhauer called life a kind of slavery, not to tyrants or governments, but to the will itself. We are driven to work, to love, to fight, to strive, and yet, no matter how far we go, satisfaction remains just out of reach. He put it bluntly, man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. And that realization leads to a devastating consequence. If the will rules us, then freedom is an illusion. And where freedom is an illusion, suffering becomes inevitable. But what then of happiness? Does it ever truly break through, or is even our joy caught in the will's snare? Schopenhauer's answer was merciless. Happiness, he argued, is not the law of life, it is the exception. And even then, it is not real gain but temporary relief. A fleeting pause in suffering before the will tightens its grip again. Think of it this way. When you finally get what you want, the satisfaction you feel is not true gain. It's just the relief of a burden lifted. The craving, the tension, the hunger, they stop for a moment, and that absence feels like pleasure. But soon enough, the emptiness comes back. The will creates a new object to chase, and the cycle begins again. Schopenhauer compared happiness to alms given to a beggar, enough to keep him alive today, but never enough to free him from poverty. Every joy is provisional. Every victory is temporary. Even love, which feels like life's greatest gift, was to Schopenhauer merely the will's trick to perpetuate the species, a force of reproduction dressed up as romance. What we call happiness is nothing more than the will tricking us into survival. Philosophers before him had celebrated happiness as life's highest aim. Aristotle's eudaimonia, the flourishing of human potential. Schopenhauer rejected this as an illusion. Flourishing was impossible in a world where the engine of existence was endless lack. To him, happiness was like a rainbow, visible, enchanting, but insubstantial, a trick of light and perspective. And yet, he didn't dismiss joy altogether. He saw it as a fleeting reprieve, like a cool breeze on a scorching day. Welcome it, yes, but don't mistake it for rescue. Because as long as the will rules, the shadow of disappointment stands right behind every joy. And that realization leads to his bleak but honest claim. If happiness is an illusion, then suffering is the only constant. Which leaves a darker question lingering. Is life itself worth affirming? For Schopenhauer, the answer was blunt. No. He argued that to affirm life, to embrace it as good, valuable, worth repeating, is to affirm endless cycles of pain. Imagine, he said, being forced to live your life again and again, down to every detail. Most people, when truly honest, would recoil. Why? Because life is filled less with joy and more with boredom, striving, frustration, and grief. This wasn't just Schopenhauer's mood, it was his philosophy. He wrote that life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. When we lack what we desire, we suffer. When we obtain it, the thrill fades into emptiness. And in that emptiness, Boredom gnaws until new desire arises, and the cycle starts again. Look around and it isn't hard to see. The couple who longs for marriage, only to face the dull weight of routine after the wedding. The pendulum doesn't rest. It swings, endlessly. Schopenhauer's bleak view clashed hard with the hopeful thinkers who came before him. Take Leibniz, who once claimed this was the best of all possible worlds. Schopenhauer laughed at that. If this is the best, what kind of nightmare is the worst? Enlightenment philosophers put their faith in progress and reason, but to him, that was just wishful thinking, a way of painting over suffering with pretty words. Even religion, with its promises of heaven or eternal justice, was, in his eyes, nothing more than a comfort blanket to hide the brutal truth. The world was never built for our happiness. But Schopenhauer's pessimism wasn't just negativity for the sake of it. He wasn't trying to drag people down, he was trying to wake them up. He wanted us to stop lying to ourselves, to stop pretending that suffering is a glitch that can be fixed with more progress, more prayer, or more pleasure. In his view, suffering wasn't the exception to life. It was life. He even found allies in Eastern philosophy, especially Buddhism. Both saw desire as the root of suffering, and both asked whether clinging to life was really worth it. But here's the key difference. Buddhism offered a way out through detachment, compassion, and inner freedom. Schopenhauer, however, didn't see an easy path forward. The will was too powerful, too relentless to escape so simply. And so the paradox deepens. If life is suffering, why do we cling to it so fiercely? Why, despite disappointment after disappointment, do we continue to choose life every morning we wake? For Schopenhauer, the answer was both obvious and merciless. Because the will does not ask us, it commands us. Beneath reason, beneath choice, beneath every philosophy and religion, lies an instinct that refuses to die. He called it the will to live, the blind, relentless drive that pulses through every heartbeat, every breath, every birth. It doesn't care about your happiness or your exhaustion. It only cares that you go on. That's why people cling to life, even when it disappoints them endlessly. Even in despair, the will whispers, "Continue." It is the same force that drives a starving animal to keep searching for food, or a wounded soldier to crawl forward. Not hope, not reason, pure survival. And Schopenhauer pointed out the irony. The very force that condemns us to suffering is also the one that makes us fear death. We long for release, yet recoil from it. We chase pleasure, knowing it will fade. We dread pain, knowing it will return. The will traps us in a double bind. To live is to suffer, but to stop living feels unthinkable. Philosophy and religion have tried to soften this truth. Christianity promised eternal life. The Enlightenment promised progress. Modern culture promises endless self-fulfillment. Schopenhauer stripped all that away. To him, these were consolations, ways of disguising the fact that the will keeps us moving, whether we like it or not. This is why even the most tragic lives often resist ending themselves. The will is stronger than despair. It makes existence cling to itself, even when reason tells us it might be kinder to let go. And here lies the cruelest truth of Schopenhauer's vision. True freedom can't be found in chasing life's striving. Freedom, if it exists at all, must be found in resisting it, which leads us to the radical possibility he dared to raise, that the only escape from endless disappointment lies not in more life, but in the denial of the will itself. For Schopenhauer, this was the most shocking conclusion of all. If the will is the source of all suffering, then true liberation comes not from feeding it, but from starving it. Not from chasing more desire, more pleasure, more achievement, but from stepping outside the cycle altogether. He saw models of this in ascetics, saints, and mystics, figures who renounced wealth, power, even family, and sought a life of stillness. To most people, such lives looked bleak, even joyless. But to Schopenhauer, they embodied the only true victory over the will. By refusing to be ruled by endless craving, they touched a peace that ordinary striving could never reach. This is where his thought converged most with Buddhism. Just as the Buddha spoke of nirvana as the extinguishing of craving, Schopenhauer saw salvation in quieting the will, not in death, which is still part of the will's cycle, but in a living renunciation, a life stripped of compulsions, guided not by hunger or ambition, but by detachment, and, paradoxically, by compassion. And yet, Schopenhauer knew how radical this sounded. Modern culture tells us to live fully, to chase our dreams. His message was the opposite. The less you chase, the freer you are. To most, this feels unbearable. Who wants to imagine life as a path of renunciation? And yet, echoes of this survive even today. You see glimpses of it in minimalism, meditation, or those who step back from endless consumption to seek a quieter existence. He was not naive. He admitted that very few people can reach such a state. Most are bound to the wheel of desire, pulled along by the endless swing of the pendulum. But even glimmering the possibility of denying the will, he believed, gives us a new lens. It shows us that freedom isn't about having everything, but about needing nothing. And this raises the final unsettling question. If the only escape from disappointment is renunciation, what does that mean for how we should live, or even whether life is affirming at all? For Schopenhauer, the answer was stark. Life, in its ordinary form, is not something to glorify, but something to see clearly. A cycle of craving and frustration. He believed that to live authentically is not to deny suffering, but to confront it without illusion. That's why he called happiness a mirage, a temporary pause in the storm, never the end of it. And yet, in stripping away these illusions, he offered something strange and almost liberating: honesty. When you stop expecting life to deliver lasting joy, disappointment loses some of its sting. You begin to see suffering not as a personal failure, but as the shared condition of existence. And in that recognition, Schopenhauer pointed to small but profound possibilities. Art and music, for him, were not just entertainment but windows, brief silences in the roar of the will, moments where you glimpse life outside of striving. Think of listening to a piece of music that seems to suspend time, or standing before a painting that pulls you out of yourself. For Schopenhauer, those moments weren't luxuries, they were glimpses of freedom. Compassion, too, became central. If you accept that suffering is the foundation of existence, then cruelty becomes absurd. Empathy becomes the only logical response. And you can see this today in those who dedicate their lives to easing pain. Doctors in overcrowded hospitals, volunteers in refugee camps, even ordinary people who choose patience and kindness over judgment. They don't eliminate suffering, but they make the burden lighter for others, and in doing so, for themselves. This is why his philosophy still matters. In a world obsessed with productivity, consumption, and the endless chase for more, Schopenhauer's warning cuts like a blade. More will never be enough. The will does not rest, and if you don't step outside of its grip, you will mistake every pause for victory, only to feel the hunger return. So, perhaps the point isn't to escape disappointment entirely. That may be impossible. Perhaps the point is to live with clearer eyes, to stop demanding that life fulfill promises it was never designed to keep, to find dignity not in endless desire, but in choosing where to place your attention, your compassion, your stillness. Because the real enemy is not disappointment. The real enemy is illusion. And once you see through it, disappointment may still remain, but it no longer rules you. What remains is something stronger: freedom. Now it's your turn. Do you agree with Schopenhauer that life is destined to disappoint us? Or do you believe he missed something essential about joy? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might be the very insight someone else needs. And if this reflection challenged you, stirred something in you, or made you pause and think, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because together, we're building a space where philosophy isn't just theory, but a way to face life with clearer eyes.